Who gave you that coat? The question cut through the winter air so sharply that even the traffic seemed to hesitate. Harrison Cole had just stepped out of the back of a black town car beneath the glowing awning of the Whitmore Grand, where a charity gala was still spilling light onto Madison Avenue, and for one strange second he forgot the cameras, forgot the donors, forgot the assistant at his elbow reciting tomorrow's schedule. All he could see was the little girl standing near the steam grate at the curb, no more than 9 years old, small and still in the cold, her dark fingers curled around the edges of a navy wool coat that had once belonged to him. The coat hung too large on her thin frame, the sleeves swallowing most of her hands, the hem falling almost to her shins, but Harrison knew it anyway. He knew the worn brass buttons. He knew the slight fading at the shoulder seams. And more than anything, he knew the hand-stitched silver star near the left cuff, crooked by half an inch because his mother had sewn it there herself one December night when he was 12 and too proud to admit he had torn the sleeve climbing a fence in Connecticut. "Sir?" his assistant asked quietly, confused by the way he had stopped walking. Harrison did not answer. The sidewalk around him was slick with freezing rain, reflecting the hotel lights in long gold smears, and guests in black coats and satin gowns drifted past with the soft rustle of money and perfume. But the little girl did not move. She stood by a newspaper box with a paper cup beside one boot, not begging, not calling out, not even looking at the gala crowd. Her gaze was fixed on the hotel's revolving doors like she was waiting for them to open into a different world. One of Harrison's security men stepped forward instinctively, broad shoulders tightening beneath his earpiece wire. "Kid, you can't stand here," he said, not harsh, just practiced. The girl flinched at the sound of his voice and pulled the coat tighter around herself. Harrison's chest tightened before he understood why. It was not theft he saw. It was protectiveness. She held that coat the way children held things that had kept them warm through a bad night. "Leave it," Harrison said. The guard stopped. A few feet away, someone recognized him and lifted a phone. Another person slowed down, sensing the tension the way people always did when money paused in public. Harrison barely noticed. He stepped off the red carpet runner and onto the wet sidewalk, expensive leather shoes darkening instantly at the toes. Up close, the girl looked even younger. 9, maybe 10 at most. Black, solemn, with rain beating on the tight curls around her forehead and the kind of watchful eyes that belonged to children who had learned too early that adults could change the temperature of a room with one wrong mood. She wore sneakers that had once been white and jeans too short at the ankle. But the coat was brushed clean. Not new. Not fresh from a shelter bin. Cared for. "I asked you a question," Harrison said, though his voice had changed now, lower, quieter, as if he was speaking to the coat as much as to her. The girl swallowed. "A lady at St. Luke's gave it to me," she said. Her voice was soft, careful, unmistakably American, with the clipped politeness of a child trying not to sound like trouble. "It was in the donation room." Harrison looked at the silver star on the cuff again, and the city seemed to tilt a fraction beneath him. He had donated boxes after his mother died. Shirts, scarves, old winter things from the house in Greenwich. He remembered signing the estate inventory with dry eyes and a numb hand, letting other people sort memory into categories marked keep, sell, store, discard. He had not remembered the coat. Not until now. The girl shifted her weight, and for the first time he noticed how red her knuckles were from the cold. A gust of wind swept down the avenue, needling through the street with the smell of rain, diesel, and roasted chestnuts from a cart half a block away. She tucked her chin deeper into the collar. Harrison stared at her another beat too long, then asked the question he did not mean to ask, the one that made his assistant glance up in surprise. "Are you wearing it because you like it?" he said. "Or because you need it?" The girl looked at him then, really looked at him, and when she answered, there was no self-pity in her voice at all. "Both," she said. For a moment, nobody on the sidewalk seemed to know what to do with the silence. It spread outward from Harrison Cole and the little girl in the oversized navy coat, moving through the hotel entrance, through the line of guests under the awning, through the security detail standing with that polished stiffness rich people paid for when they wanted the world controlled. The freezing rain kept falling anyway, ticking softly against black umbrellas and idling town cars. Harrison watched the child's face as if some missing answer might rise there on its own. She did not look guilty. She did not look bold either. She looked tired, cold, and careful, which unsettled him more than panic would have. "What is your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then lifted her chin just enough to be heard. "Naomi," she said. "Naomi Brooks." The name landed simply, but something about the way she said it made it sound like she had learned to offer it only when necessary. Harrison nodded once. "How old are you, Naomi?" 9. The answer came without drama. 9 years old, standing in wet sneakers on a Manhattan curb after 10 o'clock at night, wrapped in a coat that still carried the shape of another life. Harrison's assistant, Lydia, leaned in closer and lowered her voice. "Sir, the board from Halcyon Capital is still upstairs waiting for a photo with you." He did not turn. "They can wait." Lydia blinked, then stepped back without argument. That alone caused a small ripple among the people nearby. Harrison did not keep donors waiting. He did not pause for street scenes. He did not stand in the rain talking to children he did not know. Naomi shifted again, and the movement revealed a thin paper hospital wristband peeking from beneath the cuff of the coat. Harrison saw it instantly. His gaze dropped to her wrist, then back to her face. "Were you at St. Luke's tonight?" Naomi's fingers disappeared deeper into the sleeves. "Yes, sir." "Alone?" That question took longer. A bus exhaled at the corner. Somewhere behind them, a camera flash popped, then another. Naomi glanced toward the bright hotel windows and then back to the sidewalk, as though eye contact cost her something. "My grandma is there," she said. "I was with her." Harrison looked at the wristband again. Adult visitor. Temporary access. Not a patient. Not a child who should still be outside in this weather. "And now?" he asked. Naomi swallowed. "Visiting hours ended." The words were quiet, but they changed the air between them. Harrison felt them land somewhere uncomfortably human, past the expensive coat on his shoulders, past the years of schedules and transactions and carefully managed loss. Mark Dugan, his head of security, stepped forward from the edge of the awning, his jaw set with professional concern. "Sir, let me have someone call outreach," he said. "The child should not remain out here." Naomi's posture tightened at once. Harrison noticed it. So did Mark. A person could spend years around fear and still miss how small it tried to make itself. "I am not sending her off with strangers," Harrison said. Mark paused. "Then perhaps the police can assist." Naomi's eyes widened just slightly before she lowered them again. It was small, almost nothing, but Harrison saw that too. "No," he said, more sharply than he intended. The word stopped everyone. Even the doorman looked up. Harrison exhaled through his nose and forced his voice back down. "No police." Mark readjusted, saying nothing. Harrison returned his attention to Naomi. "Did someone from the hospital walk you out?" "No, sir." "Did someone know you were coming here?" She shook her head. "I just wanted to stand where it was warm for a minute." That answer did something to him. Not because it was tragic. Because it was modest. She had not asked for rescue. She had not asked for money. She had wanted heat leaking from a rich building onto a cold sidewalk. Behind Naomi, steam rose from the grate in pale ribbons, wrapping briefly around her ankles before disappearing into the rain. Harrison looked at the coat again. The brass buttons were dulled with age, but the second one from the top still held a faint scratch from an old sledding trip in Vermont. His mother had laughed when he showed it to her, then polished it with the corner of her apron and told him. Some things lasted longer when they were loved and used instead of hidden away. He had not thought about that sentence in 20 years. Now it came back whole, as if the city itself had handed it to him. Naomi followed his gaze to the coat, and for the first time there was a hint of worry in her voice. "I can give it back if it is yours," she said. "I mean if you want it back." Harrison looked up at her, rain gathering at the edge of his hairline, the noise of Manhattan blurring around them. Then he said the one thing nobody there expected to hear from him. "No, Naomi. I want to know why a 9-year-old girl had to come stand outside my hotel just to feel warm." Naomi did not answer right away. She only looked down at the wet sidewalk, as if the question itself were something fragile she had to hold carefully before setting it down. The hotel light washed over the crown of her head and caught on the rain clinging to her lashes. Harrison waited. He had built an empire on not waiting for anyone, not lawyers, not investors, not grieving relatives after the funeral, not even his own daughter when silence had turned her into a locked room he no longer knew how to enter. But in that moment, on a slick Manhattan curb with cold water seeping into the soles of shoes that cost more than some people paid in rent, he waited for a 9-year-old girl in an old coat to decide whether he was safe enough to answer. "Because the hospital lobby gets cold after midnight," Naomi said at last. "And outside the bakery on 71st, they tell you to move if you stay too long. But your hotel has warm air coming out every time the doors open." The words were plain, almost practical, and somehow that made them hit harder. Lydia turned her face away for a second, blinking at nothing. Mark shifted his stance beside the curb, uncomfortable now in a way no threat assessment could fix. Harrison looked past Naomi toward the revolving doors of the Whitmore Grand, where guests were still stepping in and out beneath chandeliers the size of small cars, each opening releasing a breath of heat and perfume onto the avenue. He had passed through those doors hundreds of times without thinking of the air itself as a luxury. Naomi rubbed one thumb against the frayed edge of the cuff, and the motion loosened something inside the coat lining. A small folded scrap of paper slipped free and drifted down through the rain like a pale leaf. Naomi gasped and bent quickly, but Harrison reached it first. He picked it up before the water could soak through, careful, instinctive, and when he unfolded it beneath the hotel light, all sound seemed to draw back from him. The handwriting was neat and slanted, written in blue ink that had faded to a smoky gray with time. He knew it immediately. He knew the long tail of the Y, the way the capital I leaned forward, the small loop on every H. His mother had written like she was in a hurry to be kind. "If you are cold, keep it. If you are scared, be brave." Harrison stared at the sentence until the words blurred. For one impossible second he was 12 again, standing in the mudroom of their old house in Greenwich while his mother buttoned that same coat under his chin and told him winter was easier when people remembered one another. Naomi watched his face carefully. "I found it in the pocket the first night," she said softly. "I did not mean to keep it if it was private. I liked what it said." Harrison lifted his eyes to hers. "The lady who gave it to you did not take the note out." Naomi shook her head. "I do not think she knew it was there. The pocket was torn inside. I found it when my hand got stuck." Harrison glanced down at the lining, and there it was, the old rip near the seam. Memory moved through him with painful precision. Vermont. A wooden sled. A nail sticking out from the basement shelf. His mother sitting at the kitchen table under yellow light, mending the lining after dinner while a storm tapped at the windows. He had forgotten all of it. Or thought he had. Mark cleared his throat quietly. "Sir, we should get this child inside somewhere warm." Harrison folded the note once, then again, but did not put it in his own pocket. Instead he stepped closer and held it out to Naomi. She blinked. "It belongs with the coat," he said. "And the coat belongs with you tonight." Naomi accepted the note with both hands, like something sacred was being returned. Her fingers trembled, whether from the cold or from surprise, Harrison could not tell. "Thank you," she whispered. Harrison looked at her hospital wristband again, then at the rain darkening the shoulders of the wool coat, then at the paper cup by her shoes with 2 quarters and a dime at the bottom. Something in him, something old and long buried under meetings and grief and polished restraint, shifted hard enough to hurt. "Naomi," he said, his voice quieter now, almost careful, "take me to your grandmother." Naomi did not move. The note rested between her fingers, damp at the edges but protected now inside the deep pocket of the coat, And she looked at Harrison as if she was trying to decide whether adults like him really meant what they said or only liked the sound of kindness when other people were watching. The hotel awning hummed softly above them as rain slid from its edge in silver lines. Behind Harrison, someone laughed too loudly near the revolving doors, and the sound felt wrong on the sidewalk now, thin and polished and far away from the small stillness that had formed around the child. "St. Luke's is 8 blocks," Naomi said. "I can walk." Harrison glanced at her soaked sneakers, then at the red raw skin above the rubber edge where her socks had slipped down. "I know you can," he said. "That is not the point." Mark stepped closer, reading Harrison's tone the way he always did when a decision had already been made. "I will have the car brought around," he said. Harrison nodded once. Lydia looked briefly stunned, then reached for her phone and began canceling the rest of his evening with the efficient calm of someone who had worked for him long enough to know surprise was not the same thing as chaos. Naomi watched all of it with wide, quiet attention. "I do not need a fancy car," she said after a moment, almost apologetically. "I just need to get back before my grandma wakes up and sees I am gone." Harrison felt something tighten in his chest again. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the instinct behind them. Even cold and tired, she was thinking about someone else waking alone under hospital lights. "Then we will get you back before she worries," he said. The town car pulled forward through the rain, black paint gleaming under the street lamps, and a driver stepped out to open the rear door. Warm air drifted out at once, carrying the dry scent of leather and cedar. Naomi took one step back instead of forward. Harrison noticed. "You can sit wherever you want," he said. "And if you would rather I follow behind, I will." Naomi looked from the open door to his face, then to Mark, then to Lydia, measuring the scene the way children did when life had trained them to search every room for the safest corner. "Will he come too?" she asked quietly, glancing at Mark. Her voice held no accusation, only caution. Harrison turned to Mark. "No." Mark stopped short. "Sir, with respect, I should remain with you." "Remain close if you must," Harrison said, "but not in the car." Mark studied Naomi for 1 second, then Harrison, then gave a short nod and stepped back into the rain. Naomi let out a breath so small it was almost invisible. Harrison moved aside from the doorway, giving her space first. She climbed in carefully, gathering the oversized coat around her knees before sitting on the far end of the back seat like someone trying not to leave a mark. Harrison followed and took the opposite side, leaving the wide center untouched. The door closed with a heavy, muffled seal, and Manhattan vanished into a hush broken only by the ticking of rain against the windows and the muted swish of tires on wet pavement. Naomi held her hands in her lap, fingers laced tightly enough to pale at the knuckles. Harrison noticed she had tucked the notes safely away but kept touching the pocket, checking it was still there. "Does your grandmother know you waited outside?" he asked. Naomi shook her head. "She thought I was in the family lounge." "And were you?" "Until they closed it." Harrison looked toward the fogging window. Buildings slid by in blurred gold and red. Delivery trucks idled at curbs. Steam rose from grates and drifted across crosswalks like breath leaving the city itself. He had ridden these streets 1,000 times, insulated from them by tinted glass and an overfilled calendar, but tonight every block seemed newly visible, sharper somehow, as if the child across from him had altered the lens through which he moved through his own city. "What is your grandmother's name?" he asked. "Evelyn Brooks." "Is she very sick?" Naomi lowered her eyes to the seam of the seat. "The doctors say her lungs are tired. They say a lot of things in front of me when they think I am coloring." Harrison went still. Naomi looked up again, and for the first time there was a flicker of something in her face that was not caution or cold. It was older than either. "I do not mind people being honest," she said softly. "I just wish they would remember I am in the room." The car turned onto the avenue leading east, and hospital lights began to appear through the rain ahead, pale and steady against the dark. Harrison looked at Naomi in the dim back seat, at the coat around her shoulders, at the careful way she sat, taking up as little space as possible, and shame moved through him with surprising force. Not for something he had done tonight, but for all the years he had lived in a city full of children like this without ever truly seeing one. When the glowing red letters of St. Luke's came into view, he spoke before he could talk himself out of it. "Naomi," he said, his voice low and even. "Tonight you do not have to disappear just because other people are comfortable not noticing." The car eased beneath the emergency entrance awning, and the rain changed its sound, softening from a hard hiss on the roof to a distant tapping on the pavement beyond the overhang. White lights spilled across the wet concrete in broad, tired squares. Nurses moved in and out through sliding glass doors with clipboards and paper cups, their faces worn by the hour. A man in green scrubs pushed an empty wheelchair past the curb. Somewhere inside, a monitor gave off a steady, patient beep. Naomi looked through the window before the driver had even come around to open the door, every muscle in her small body turning toward the hospital as if an invisible thread were pulling her back. Harrison saw it, and understood at once that whatever had happened on the sidewalk had not changed the real center of her night. It was not him. It was the woman upstairs in a hospital bed. The driver opened Naomi's door first. She stepped out carefully, one sneaker landing in a shallow puddle at the curb, and then she was already moving, coat gathered at the front, dark curls damp against her temple. Harrison followed under the awning, and Mark fell into place several feet behind them despite the earlier instruction, silent now, wise enough not to interrupt. The warmth inside the lobby hit all at once, carrying the scent of disinfectant, burnt coffee, and the dry heat of old radiators working too hard. Naomi slowed only when they reached the check-in desk. A woman with reading glasses low on her nose looked up from a computer screen, her expression ready to be efficient rather than kind, but it changed the moment she saw Harrison Cole standing behind the child in the navy coat. Recognition flickered, then professional confusion. "Can I help you?" she asked. Naomi stepped forward before Harrison could speak. "My grandma is Evelyn Brooks," she said. "Room 512. I was with her earlier." The woman typed quickly, eyes moving across the monitor. "Visiting hours ended 40 minutes ago, sweetheart." Naomi's fingers tightened around the cuff of the coat. "I know." The woman looked up again, this time noticing how wet Naomi's shoes were, how late it was, how the child's chin had that stubborn little angle some children used when they were trying not to beg. Harrison reached into his coat for his wallet, then stopped. The gesture was so automatic it almost shamed him. Money was how he solved discomfort. Money was how the world around him softened every hard edge before it could touch him. But Naomi had not asked for cash on the curb. She had asked to get back before her grandmother woke up alone. There was a difference, and for the first time in a long time, he felt it clearly. "Is there a reason she cannot return to the room?" he asked. The receptionist straightened at the sound of his voice. "Normally, yes. Pediatric visitors after hours require approval if there is no guardian present." Naomi kept her gaze on the desk. "I am her guardian," she said quietly, and the receptionist's hands paused over the keyboard. The sentence hung there, too heavy for a child's voice and too matter-of-fact to be dismissed. Harrison looked at Naomi, really looked at her, and saw it more fully now. The careful answers. The measured movements. The way she tracked every adult in the room before deciding where to stand. 9 years old, and already moving through the world like someone responsible for keeping it from falling apart. "You are her granddaughter," the receptionist said gently. "That is not the same paperwork." Naomi lowered her eyes. Harrison stepped beside her, not in front of her. "Then tell me what paperwork would make common sense legal for the next 10 minutes, he said. The receptionist blinked, glanced at his face again, then at Mark in the background, then back to Naomi. The lobby clock clicked to 10:47. A janitor pushed a yellow mop bucket down the far corridor. Somewhere overhead, an elevator chimed. Finally, the woman picked up the phone beside her keyboard. "Let me call the floor nurse," she said. Naomi released a breath she had been holding for so long her shoulders dropped when it left. Harrison noticed. He also noticed that her left hand drifted once more to the pocket where the note rested. "Have you eaten?" he asked softly while the receptionist spoke into the phone. Naomi nodded, then shook her head, then gave a tiny embarrassed shrug. I had crackers from the vending machine. Harrison almost said I will get you something better, but he caught himself again. Better according to whom? Better than what? Instead he asked, would your grandmother worry if she smelled food and knew you had not shared it with her? Naomi looked up at him then, and for the first time since the sidewalk, the corner of her mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it carried the shape of one. Yes, she said. She would. The receptionist hung up the phone and cleared her throat. Room 512 approved for 10 minutes, she said. No trouble, and no wandering the halls. Naomi nodded once, serious again. Harrison glanced toward the elevators, then back at the child beside him, and understood that whatever happened upstairs, he had already crossed into a world where titles, galas, and polished speeches meant almost nothing at all. The elevator ride to the 5th floor was quiet enough for Harrison to hear the soft rustle of Naomi's coat every time she breathed. She stood near the corner with her hands tucked deep into the pockets, the damp hem brushing her shins, her eyes fixed on the glowing numbers above the door, as if looking away might delay the ride. Mark stayed outside in the lobby as instructed, and Lydia remained downstairs handling calls, which left only the two of them in the brushed steel box with its faint smell of sanitizer and cold metal. Harrison had spent years in private elevators lined with glass and walnut, rising through buildings that opened like obedient machines beneath his name, but this one moved with a tired hum and a slight tremor between floors, and somehow that felt more honest. Naomi touched the pocket holding the folded note again. Harrison noticed that she did it whenever the silence grew too large. Does your grandmother know about the coat? He asked, keeping his voice low. Naomi nodded once. She told me not to get attached to things that can be taken away. The answer was gentle, not bitter, and that made it land harder than bitterness would have. Harrison looked at the floor indicator as the number 5 lit up in red. And did you listen to her? Naomi tilted her head a little, almost considering whether honesty was worth the risk. No, sir, she said. Not about this one. The elevator doors opened onto a dim hallway washed in soft blue light. The carpet was worn flat in the center, and the air carried the heavy hospital mix of laundry detergent, antiseptic, and overheated radiators. A television murmured from a room down the hall, the volume low enough to sound more like weather than words. A nurse at the station glanced up, recognized Naomi from the phone call, and gave a small nod before returning to a chart. Naomi did not slow. She moved down the corridor with quiet certainty, sneakers whispering over the carpet, passing room numbers until she stopped at 512. Her hand paused over the handle. For the first time since the sidewalk, Harrison saw real fear flicker across her face. It was not fear of him. It was the fear of what might be waiting on the other side of a half-lit room when someone you loved had been breathing under borrowed machines all day. Naomi pushed the door open carefully. The room inside was narrow and dim, lit mostly by the amber glow of a wall lamp and the green pulse of a monitor by the bed. Evelyn Brooks lay propped against white pillows, her silver-gray hair wrapped in a satin scarf, her skin the warm brown of Naomi's but faded now by fatigue and hospital light. An oxygen line rested beneath her nose. On the tray table beside her sat a paperback Bible, a plastic cup with melted ice, and a pair of reading glasses folded with almost ceremonial neatness. She was asleep at first, or seemed to be, until Naomi stepped closer and the old woman's eyes opened with surprising speed. Baby? Evelyn's voice was thin but alert, roughened by sickness and worry. Naomi? Naomi crossed the room in 3 quick steps. I am here, Grandma. Evelyn's gaze moved past her, finding Harrison in the doorway, and her entire expression changed. Not fear. Not all. Just immediate caution, the kind earned by long experience with strangers who wore wealth like armor. Who is this? She asked, her voice sharpening despite its weakness. Naomi turned, suddenly aware of how impossible the scene looked. A 9-year-old girl in an oversized coat returning after hours with one of the most recognizable men in Manhattan standing under the hospital lamp like he had taken a wrong turn out of another world. Harrison stepped forward only far enough to be polite. "My name is Harrison Cole," he said. "I met Naomi outside the Whitmore. She was trying to get back to you." Evelyn's eyes narrowed just slightly, taking in the tailored coat, the polished shoes, the posture that belonged to boardrooms and private jets. "And now she has," Evelyn said. The room grew still. Harrison recognized dismissal when he heard it. He also recognized dignity, especially when it came wrapped in fatigue and an oxygen tube. Naomi looked from one to the other, small shoulders tightening beneath the navy wool. "Grandma, he was kind," she said softly. "He did not have to be, but he was." Evelyn kept her eyes on Harrison a moment longer, measuring him the way Naomi had measured every adult tonight. Then her gaze dropped to the coat around her granddaughter's shoulders, and something flickered there. Recognition. Not of the garment itself, but of what it meant for Naomi to have returned warmer than she left. "Come here, sugar," Evelyn whispered. Naomi stepped to the bed at once, and Evelyn reached out a thin hand to touch the silver star stitched near the cuff. Her fingers rested there for a second, then moved to Naomi's cheek. "You are freezing," she murmured. Naomi gave the smallest shake of her head. "Not anymore." Harrison stood by the door, feeling strangely like an intruder in a sacred place, and yet unable to walk away. The room was small, the paint plain, the machine noises unremarkable, but there was a kind of gravity in it his penthouse had never held. Nothing here was ornamental. Every object mattered. Every breath mattered. Every minute someone stayed mattered. Evelyn looked up at him again, and when she spoke this time, her voice had softened by half an inch. "Mr. Cole," she said, "what exactly happened between the sidewalk and my room that made my granddaughter trust you enough to come upstairs?" Harrison did not answer immediately. He looked at Evelyn Brooks in the dim hospital light, at the fine lines around her eyes, at the calm suspicion in her face, and understood that this was not a woman who had survived long by taking polished men at their word. Naomi stayed close to the bed, one small hand resting on the blanket near her grandmother's wrist, the oversized navy coat falling around her like borrowed shelter. For a second, Harrison almost gave the easy version. "I drove her here. I helped at the desk. She was cold." But the room did not feel built for easy versions. "She trusted me because I listened," he said at last. Evelyn's gaze stayed steady. Harrison glanced down at Naomi, then back to the woman in the bed. "And because she was carrying something that once belonged to my family." Naomi touched the pocket holding the folded note. Evelyn noticed. "The coat?" she asked softly. Harrison nodded. "It used to be mine. A long time ago." The old woman's eyes moved over the brass buttons, the worn seams, the silver star stitched near the cuff. "I wondered about that stitching," she murmured. "Naomi said it looked like somebody loved it before it reached us." Harrison felt the words land with quiet force. "Loved it before it reached us." There was something unbearably precise in that. He looked at the crooked star and saw his mother's hands again, pale against dark wool, working under the kitchen light, while the radio played old Motown and snow pressed against the windows. He had spent years teaching himself not to live in memory. Business had rewarded that skill. Grief had demanded it. But tonight memory had walked back into his life wearing wet sneakers and a hospital wristband. "There was a note in the pocket," Naomi said, her voice small but clear. "I showed him." Evelyn turned toward her granddaughter. "You kept it safe?" Naomi nodded at once. "Yes, ma'am." "Then that was the right thing to do." Harrison watched them, struck again by the plain dignity with which everything passed between them. No wasted words. No performance. Even affection here was economical, as if life had taught them to make every ounce of tenderness count. Evelyn shifted slightly against the pillows, and the monitor by the bed gave a gentle change in rhythm before settling again. Naomi instantly leaned closer. "Do you need water?" she asked. "A blanket? I need you to breathe, baby." Evelyn said, not unkindly. You look like you have been holding your breath since supper. Naomi let out the smallest exhale, and Harrison realized she probably had. He looked at the tray table, the untouched cup of ice, the hospital menu face down near the Bible, the reading glasses folded with care. Every object in the room seemed to testify to endurance. How long have you been here? He asked. Evelyn turned her head slightly toward him. 3 days this time. This time, Harrison repeated. I have lungs with expensive opinions, she said dryly, and Naomi gave a tiny sound that was almost a laugh. It changed the room for a second, just enough to let warmth in. Harrison found himself smiling before he remembered he had forgotten how to do it without effort. She tells jokes when the doctors use words she does not like, Naomi said. That way they do not get to be the most important people in the room. Evelyn looked at him as if to say there, now you know something real. Harrison nodded once, taking it in. And where is Naomi staying? He asked carefully. The question made Evelyn go still. Naomi did too. It was not the stillness of surprise. It was the stillness of people who knew that certain questions could pull shame into a room even when no one intended it. Home, Evelyn said after a beat. Harrison did not challenge the word, but his silence made clear that he had seen enough tonight to understand home could mean many things. Evelyn's fingers moved over the blanket, smoothing a crease that did not need smoothing. Our apartment building had a pipe break last week, she said. Management says repairs are coming. Repairs are always coming. My daughter's friend let Naomi stay with her 2 nights, and then I got admitted again, so Naomi has been between places that mean well. Naomi kept her eyes on the blanket. Harrison felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the weather outside. Between places that mean well, he repeated quietly. That is one way to say it. Evelyn looked at him hard then, measuring whether he heard the truth inside the softness. Harrison met her gaze and let her see that he did. Naomi's hand still rested near her grandmother's wrist, small and steady. She looked up at him then, and in the green glow of the monitor, and the tired warmth of the lamp, she asked the question that split him open more cleanly than anything else that night. Mr. Cole, she said, do rich people ever get scared to go to sleep because they do not know where they are supposed to be in the morning? The question stayed in the room after Naomi asked it, resting there beside the monitor glow, and the low hiss of oxygen, simple and impossible to dodge. Harrison looked at her, at the serious 9-year-old face turned up toward him, at the coat around her shoulders, at the hand still resting near her grandmother's wrist as if she could keep the older woman anchored by touch alone, and for the first time in years he answered a child without filtering the truth through something polished and useful. Yes, he said quietly. They do. Naomi blinked, as if she had expected evasion and not honesty. Evelyn watched him without interrupting. Harrison moved a little farther into the room, not enough to crowd it, only enough that he no longer felt like a man standing in a doorway between two worlds. Not for the same reasons, he said. Or maybe not at first. But money does not keep grief from entering a room. It does not stop a house from feeling empty. It does not teach a person what to do after the person who understood them best is gone. Naomi listened without moving. Children knew when an adult had finally stopped performing. Harrison glanced at the rain streaking the dark hospital window and saw, faintly reflected there, his own face lined by light from the monitor, and years he rarely let anyone examine too closely. My wife died 3 years ago, he said. After that, my daughter stopped sleeping well. Then she stopped talking much. The doctors call it complicated grief, anxiety, adjustment trauma. They use careful words. But most nights it looks like a little girl staring at the ceiling while the whole apartment tries too hard to be quiet. Evelyn's eyes softened by a degree so small most people would have missed it. Naomi did not. How old is she? Naomi asked. 8. Naomi absorbed that. That is close to 9, she said, as if this were not a statistic but a bridge. Harrison almost smiled. Yes, he said. It is. A nurse passed in the hallway outside, her shoes whispering over the carpet, and the room settled again into that hospital stillness that never felt like peace so much as exhausted truce. Naomi looked down at the blanket, then at the pocket holding the note. "Sometimes grown-ups talk too much when somebody is scared," she said softly. "They keep trying to make the scared part leave faster." Evelyn gave the tiniest hum of agreement. Harrison felt something old and defensive in him begin to loosen. "And what should they do instead?" he asked. Naomi answered so quickly it was clear she had learned it from life and not from theory. "Stay." The word landed with astonishing force. Stay. Not fix. Not explain. Not manage. Stay. Harrison looked at Evelyn, at Naomi, at the worn Bible and the melting ice and the careful order of things in a room where nothing was luxurious, and yet nothing was careless. Stay. He thought of the nights he had stood outside Ava's bedroom door listening for movement, but not entering because he did not know how to sit beside pain he could not solve. He thought of tutors, child psychologists, art therapy, sleep consultants, expensive specialists with calm voices and full calendars. He had tried everything except helplessness. Except presence. Except staying. Naomi shifted her weight and pulled the coat a little tighter. "The note helped me," she said. "Not because it made anything better. Just because it felt like somebody had thought about scared people before." Harrison lowered his eyes. His mother had written that on an ordinary winter day, never knowing the sentence would travel through years and donation bins and a church basement to find a 9-year-old girl in a hospital corridor. He felt suddenly, painfully close to tears and had no idea what to do with that. Then his phone vibrated in the inside pocket of his coat, the sound unnaturally sharp in the dim room. He almost ignored it, but the screen lit with Lydia's name and beneath it a text already visible in the preview. "It is Ava. She is awake and asking for you again." Harrison stared at the words. Naomi noticed the change in his face at once. "Your daughter?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "She is having a hard night." Naomi was quiet for a second, then she reached into her pocket, pulled out the folded note, and held it toward him. Harrison looked at it, startled. "No," he said. "That is yours." Naomi kept her hand extended. "Maybe tonight it can be ours," she said. Harrison looked at the child in the old navy coat, at the careful way she offered comfort without losing any of her own dignity, and something inside him, something frozen for much longer than one winter, began at last to thaw. Harrison did not take the note right away. He looked at Naomi's small outstretched hand, at the soft fold of paper resting on her palm, and something about the trust in that gesture made him feel suddenly unsteady. Children were not supposed to comfort men like him. They were not supposed to sense the fracture lines beneath tailored coats and measured voices and offer a piece of warmth anyway. But Naomi did not seem to know there were rules against it. Or perhaps she knew and did not care. "You should keep it," he said gently. Naomi tilted her head. "I am keeping it," she replied. "I am just letting you borrow the brave part." The room went quiet in a different way then, not with hospital fatigue or late-night caution, but with the kind of stillness that comes when truth arrives in a voice too young to be rehearsed. Evelyn closed her eyes for one brief second, as if the words had passed through her too. Harrison let out a slow breath and accepted the note at last, careful not to crease it more than time already had. The paper was warm from Naomi's hand. His phone vibrated again in his pocket. Lydia this time. Then a second call right behind it from the private floor nurse at his building. Ava was not settling. Harrison stared at the screen and felt the old panic begin to rise, that cold helplessness he had come to know too well on nights when his daughter woke from sleep with her heart racing and her words locked somewhere she could not reach. He stepped toward the hallway and then stopped, torn for a second between the room he was in and the one waiting for him across the city. Naomi noticed before he said anything. "You should call her," she said softly. Harrison looked back. "I do not want to leave you and your grandmother like this." Evelyn gave him a dry look from the bed. "Mr. Cole, if I can survive hospital coffee, I can survive one phone call." Naomi nodded toward the hall. You can stand right outside. That still counts as staying. The words struck him again, simple and exact. Harrison stepped into the corridor with the folded note in his hand and answered Lydia on the second ring. Her voice came low and quick. She woke up crying 15 minutes ago. She would not let Marta turn on the lamp. She keeps asking if you are still at the gala. Harrison closed his eyes for a moment. Through the open doorway behind him, he could hear the soft pulse of Evelyn's monitor and the faint rustle of Naomi moving a chair closer to the bed. Put me on speaker with Ava, he said. There was a pause, a shuffle, then a hush. When Lydia spoke again, her voice had dropped to a whisper. She is here. Harrison leaned one shoulder against the wall beneath the dim hallway light. Ava? He said. At first there was nothing. Then a small breath, close to the phone. Not speech. Just proof she was listening. I am here, he said. I know it is a hard night. Silence again. He unfolded the note with careful fingers and looked at the faded blue ink. For 1 second he almost laughed at the strangeness of it, a billionaire in a hospital hallway reading his dead mother's words from a scrap of paper handed to him by a child in his old coat. Then he stopped resisting the moment, and read. If you are cold, keep it. If you are scared, be brave. The line hung between him and the speakerphone, crossing burrows, crossing grief, crossing every failed expert recommendation and every expensive strategy that had never reached the part of his daughter that was hurting. He waited. On the other end, there was a quiet rustle of sheets. Then, very softly, Ava asked, Who said that? Harrison's chest tightened so sharply he had to steady his breath before answering. It was not that she had never spoken. It was that nights like this usually closed her down to almost nothing. One question could feel like daylight after a long storm. My mother did, he said. A long time ago. Another pause. Then Ava's voice again, smaller now. Did she mean it? Harrison looked through the doorway into Evelyn's room. Naomi had climbed into the visitor chair and tucked her feet beneath her, the navy coat around her like a blanket, one hand still resting lightly on the hospital bed as if she could lend steadiness by contact alone. He understood then that truth did not have to be grand to be life-saving. Sometimes it only had to stay near. Yes, he said into the phone. She meant it very much. The hallway remained still. Down the corridor, an elevator chimed. A nurse laughed softly at some private joke, and then lowered her voice again. Harrison waited, note trembling slightly between his fingers. When Ava finally spoke, her words were almost too quiet to hear. Can you come home? Harrison closed his eyes. He wanted to say yes at once, wanted to move, to fix, to split himself in two and fail neither child tonight. But the room behind him and the voice on the phone were tied by the same invisible thread now, and for the first time he understood that leaving one kind of fear to answer another was not the only choice in the world. Harrison opened his eyes and looked through the doorway into room 512, where Naomi sat curled in the visitor chair with the navy coat wrapped around her knees and one hand resting on Evelyn's blanket as if staying close were a kind of medicine all by itself. Then he looked down at the note in his hand and understood something that should have been obvious long before tonight. Presence did not always mean geography. It meant steadiness. It meant not vanishing when fear entered the room. Yes, he said softly into the phone. I am coming home. But I want to try something first, all right? On the other end, he heard the small rustle of Ava shifting in bed. What? She whispered. Harrison glanced toward Naomi. She had noticed the look in his face and was watching him now, not intruding, just listening with the grave attention children gave when they sensed something important was deciding itself nearby. There is someone here I want you to meet, he said. Lydia said nothing, but he could feel her surprise through the silence of the line. Harrison stepped back into the room and lowered his voice. Naomi, he said. My daughter is on the phone. Naomi blinked. The one who is scared tonight? Harrison nodded. Yes. Naomi looked at Evelyn first, the way she always did before stepping into anything unknown. Evelyn gave the smallest nod from the bed, her eyes half closed now but clear. Naomi slid off the chair and came closer. Harrison switched the call to speaker and held the phone carefully between them, as though the device itself had become something more delicate than glass. "Ava," he said, "are you still there?" A small breath answered him. "Yes." Naomi stood very still for a second, fingers curled around the cuff with the silver star, then leaned just enough toward the phone to be heard. "Hi," she said. Her voice was soft and plain, without the bright cheer adults often forced onto children in distress. "My name is Naomi. I am 9. The room stayed quiet. Harrison felt his own pulse in his throat. Then Ava spoke, barely above a whisper. "I am 8. Naomi nodded instinctively, though the child across the city could not see it. "That is close to 9, she said. Harrison closed his eyes for one brief second. The exact same line. The exact same little bridge. On the speaker there was a pause, and then something like a tiny exhale that might have been the beginning of relief. "Are you at a hospital?" Ava asked. Naomi glanced back at Evelyn, then returned her focus to the phone. "Yes. My grandma is tired, so I am sitting with her." Another silence followed, but this one felt different. Less like fear. More like listening. "I do not like hospitals," Ava murmured. "Me neither," Naomi said at once. "They smell like people trying too hard to be clean when everybody is still worried." Harrison looked up, startled by the accuracy of it. Even Evelyn gave the faintest hint of a smile against the pillow. On the phone, Ava made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but close enough to loosen the air in the room. Naomi seemed to hear it too. Her shoulders relaxed by a fraction. "Do you want to know a secret?" she asked. Harrison almost interrupted, then stopped himself. Ava answered after a beat. "Okay." Naomi touched the pocket where the note had been. "Sometimes being brave is not loud," she said. "Sometimes it is just staying where you are for one more minute instead of running away in your head." Harrison felt the words move through him with the weight of something bigger than advice. On the speaker there was the soft creak of mattress springs. "What if one more minute feels long?" Ava asked. Naomi thought about that. He could see her do it, see the seriousness settle over her face the way it did whenever life presented a question that deserved more than comfort. "Then you make the minutes smaller," she said. "You only do 10 seconds. Then 10 more. Then maybe you hold something soft. Or somebody reads you one true thing." Harrison had to steady his hand on the phone. Lydia was silent on the other end. Marta too, wherever she was standing in the penthouse nursery. "Would you read it again?" Ava asked. Harrison looked at Naomi. Naomi looked at him. Either of them said you. Either of them had to. Harrison unfolded the note once more, the paper faintly warm from being passed between frightened people who had all needed it for different reasons, and he read the lines slowly into the hush that connected a hospital room on the Upper East Side to a dark bedroom across the city. When he finished, no one spoke for a few seconds. Then Ava's voice came through the speaker, small and tired and real. "Can Naomi stay on the phone until I fall asleep?" Harrison did not answer for a second because the request was so simple it nearly undid him. Not a specialist. Not a sedative. Not a promise that tomorrow would feel easier. Just one frightened little girl asking if another frightened little girl could stay on the line until sleep finally found her. He looked at Naomi, and Naomi looked back with the quiet seriousness she seemed to bring to every hard thing, as if childhood had been shortened for her by forces no child should have to study so closely. "If that is all right with you," Harrison said softly. Naomi nodded once. "It is all right." He lowered himself into the chair beside the bed, bringing the phone closer between them while Evelyn watched from her pillows with tired, knowing eyes. On the speaker, the sound from the penthouse had gone hushed. He could almost picture it, the dim nursery lamp still off, the skyline beyond the glass hidden by rain, Lydia and Marta standing near the doorway with their hands folded because money could summon people quickly but not teach them what to do with sorrow once it arrived. "Ava," Naomi said gently, "you do not have to talk if you do not want to. I can just stay here." There was a small rustle from the other end, then a whisper. "What are you doing right now?" Naomi looked around the hospital room as if taking inventory for someone who needed to imagine safety before she could borrow it. "I am sitting next to my grandma," she said. "There is a chair that squeaks when I move, and the blanket on her bed has tiny blue squares on it, and there is a machine that sounds like it is reminding everybody to keep going." Harrison lowered his gaze. He had spent years around people trained to comfort, and none of them had ever spoken with such plain accuracy. Ava was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, "Are you wearing the coat?" Naomi touched the silver star stitched near the cuff. "Yes." "Is it warm?" Naomi thought about it. "Yes," she said. "But not just because it is wool." A longer pause followed. "Because of the note?" Ava asked. Naomi's face changed slightly at that, softening in a way that made her look her age and older than her age at the same time. "Yes," she said again. "Because of the note." Harrison watched her profile in the amber light, the small arc of her cheek, the damp curls drying at her temple, the oversized coat gathered at her knees, and understood with startling clarity that the most valuable thing in the room tonight was not his watch, or his phone, or the black card in his wallet, or the name that opened doors across the city. It was a child who had every reason to close in on herself, and had chosen instead to make room for somebody else. "Can you tell me what the coat feels like?" Ava asked. Naomi looked down at the sleeve as if reading from it. "Heavy in a good way," she said. "Like when somebody puts a blanket around you straight from the dryer. The collar is soft because it is old. One pocket is deeper than the other. And the inside smells a little like cedar and rain now." Harrison felt his throat tighten. Cedar. The old closets in Greenwich had always smelled like cedar. Ava made another faint sound, almost thoughtful. "My mom had a sweater that smelled like orange tea," she whispered. The room went still. Harrison could not remember the last time Ava had brought her mother into a conversation without shutting down afterward. Naomi did not rush to fill the silence. She only answered in the same careful tone. "Then maybe your body remembers her when you smell it." On the bed, Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed out slowly through the oxygen line, as if even she could feel the delicacy of what was passing across that speaker. Harrison sat absolutely still. "Do you think that is why I get scared at night?" Ava asked. Naomi drew her feet up into the chair and rested her chin on her knees, the phone between her and Harrison like a small bridge lit from within. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe night is just where the missing part gets louder." Harrison bowed his head. No therapist had ever said it that simply. No consultant had ever said it that truly. On the speaker, there was no response for several seconds, and when Ava spoke again, her voice had gone softer, sleepier around the edges. "What do you do when the missing part gets loud?" Naomi answered without thinking, which made Harrison trust the answer even more. "I hold something real," she said. "A sleeve. A note. My grandma's hand. And I do not make promises I cannot keep. I just tell myself I am here now. Sometimes now is enough to get to the next now." Harrison felt Evelyn's gaze on him then. He looked up and found her watching not Naomi, not the phone, but him, as if to see whether he understood the gift his daughter was being handed through this strange midnight thread between worlds. He did. God help him, he did. On the speaker, Ava breathed in, then out, slow and uneven, like someone finally stepping down from a ledge inside herself. "Naomi?" she murmured. "I am here," Naomi whispered back. "Will you still be there when I wake up?" Harrison expected Naomi to hesitate. Instead, she looked at the folded note in his hand, then at Evelyn, then straight ahead into the dim room, and answered with the kind of honesty that did not flatter fear but did not abandon it either. "Maybe not on the phone," she said, "but not gone either." The line stayed quiet after that except for the softening rhythm of Ava's breathing. Harrison listened as the breaths lengthened, listened as the spaces between them grew calm, listened until Lydia finally came on in a whisper and said, "She is asleep." No one in room 512 moved for a moment. Then Naomi's shoulders dropped all at once, as if she had been holding up more than a conversation. Her eyes fluttered with sudden exhaustion. She looked very small in the chair then, very much a 9-year-old who had spent too much of the night carrying other people's fear. Evelyn reached a weak hand toward her. "Baby," she murmured, "when was the last time you slept in a real bed?" Naomi did not answer. She only lowered her eyes, and in that silence Harrison got the truth. The silence after Evelyn's question was not empty. It was full of arithmetic no child should ever have to do. Harrison saw it plainly now in the way Naomi lowered her eyes, in the way her fingers went back to the worn cuff with the silver star, in the way she seemed to shrink just slightly whenever anyone mentioned sleep, as if rest itself had become a complicated subject she could not afford to answer honestly. Evelyn watched him from the bed, tired but sharp, and he understood that this was the moment when rich men often made everything worse by moving too fast, offering too much, confusing control with care. So he did the one thing he had only just begun learning how to do. He sat still long enough to hear the truth before speaking into it. "Naomi," he said gently, "where were you planning to sleep tonight?" Naomi stared at the blanket. The monitor glowed green beside Evelyn's bed. Rain traced faint lines down the dark window. "I was going to stay in the chair," she said, "until they told me I could not." Harrison looked at the narrow vinyl visitor chair, at the hard armrests, at the way her small shoulders had already folded around exhaustion. He pictured her there until dawn beneath hospital light, shoes still damp, coat wrapped tight, waking every few minutes because children in chairs never really slept. They only disappeared in little pieces. "And after that?" he asked. Naomi did not answer. Evelyn did. "After that," she said quietly, "she was going to tell me it was all fine so I would not worry." Harrison nodded once because there was nothing false in it. He rose from the chair and stepped into a hallway, not to escape the room but to protect its dignity from the mechanics of what came next. The 5th floor was quieter now. The nurse at the station was writing notes under a pool of soft light. Somewhere far down the corridor, a cartwheel clicked with every turn. Harrison called Lydia first. She answered at once, her voice low. "Ava is asleep," she whispered. "I know," he said. "Listen carefully. I need you to contact the Family Services office here at St. Luke's, then my legal team, then our Housing Foundation director. Not tomorrow. Now." Lydia did not ask why. She had worked for him too long to waste time on questions when his voice had gone that calm. "And Lydia," he added, looking through the small window in the door at Naomi beside her grandmother's bed, "this is not a donation event. No press. No announcements. No photo-friendly language in anybody's mouth." There was a beat on the line. "Understood." He ended the call and approached the nurse's station. The night nurse looked up, tired but alert, pen still in hand. Harrison kept his voice measured. "I am not asking you to break policy," he said. "I am asking you to tell me what options exist tonight for a child caregiver who has nowhere appropriate to sleep." The nurse's expression changed at once, not because of his name, though she knew it, but because of the specific shape of the question. "We have a family quiet room on the pediatric floor," she said slowly, "but minors cannot stay there alone, and it is usually reserved. There is also a social worker on call." Harrison nodded. "Call the social worker. And if room 512 qualifies for any patient advocate review or temporary overnight exception, I want the real answer, not the quick one." The nurse studied him for half a second, then picked up the phone. When Harrison returned to the room, Naomi looked up immediately, the way children did when the future might be walking back through the door in somebody's face. He did not stay standing over her. He sat again, bringing himself level with her instead of above her. "I am working on tonight," he said. "Not forever. Not with promises I have not earned. Just tonight first." Naomi searched his face. "People say tonight when they mean maybe," she said. Harrison took that without flinching. "Then let me be more exact," he said. "You will not sleep in that chair if I can help it." Evelyn watched him carefully. "And what do you think help is, Mr. Cole?" she asked. The question was not hostile. It was heavier than that. It was moral. Harrison looked at the old coat around Naomi's shoulders and answered with more honesty than elegance. Not buying gratitude, he said. Not making you feel small. Not separating family just because a system is inconvenient. Help is making sure a sick woman has what she needs, and her granddaughter does not have to pretend she is not tired. Evelyn held his gaze a long moment. Then, very slowly, she nodded. Naomi looked from one adult to the other, as if feeling some hidden lock turn in the room. A knock came softly at the door. The night nurse stepped in with a woman in a navy cardigan and hospital badge, her hair pulled back, her face lined with the kind of fatigue that came from caring for people instead of managing them. "I am Marisol," she said. "I am the overnight social worker." She knelt so that her eyes were level with Naomi's. "I heard you have had a long night." Naomi gave the smallest nod. Marisol glanced at Evelyn, then back at Naomi. "Here's what I can do right now," she said. "There is a larger room opening on this floor because of a discharge. It has a sleeper chair that pulls out flat and enough space for you to stay with your grandmother. I can authorize a temporary overnight family pass until morning review." Naomi blinked, not quite trusting it yet. Evelyn closed her eyes for 1 second, and when she opened them again, there was relief there she had been too proud to ask for. Harrison looked at Marisol. "Thank you," he said, and meant it enough that the words came out almost rough. Marisol gave him a brief nod, then turned back to Naomi. "There will be clean socks too," she added. At that, something changed in Naomi's face. Not a smile exactly. Something softer, more stunned than happy, as if Mercy had arrived speaking in ordinary language she could finally believe. She touched the silver star on her cuff and looked up at Harrison with tired, searching eyes. "You really meant tonight?" she whispered. Harrison looked at the child in the old coat, at the note safe in his hand, at the grandmother who had held on just long enough to see her granddaughter treated like she mattered, and he answered the only way that fit the room. "Yes," he said. "Tonight first. And then morning?" Morning arrived slowly at St. Luke's, not with sunrise so much as with the gradual widening of the windows and the soft shift in hallway sounds from night voices to day voices, from hushed footsteps to rolling carts and fresh coffee lids snapping shut. Harrison had not gone home. He had stepped out only long enough to sign forms Marisol placed before him, take 3 calls from Lydia, and stand for a few quiet minutes beneath the vending machines on the 4th floor while the city turned from black glass to pewter outside. When he returned just after 6, room 512 was empty, the bed stripped, the lamp off, and for one strange second his heart lurched until he saw the new room at the end of the hall with the door half open and a strip of warm light across the floor. He slowed before entering. Evelyn Brooks slept on the hospital bed beneath a clean white blanket, her breathing easier now, her satin scarf folded neatly on the table beside a fresh cup of water and a vase with 2 grocery store carnations someone from the night staff had placed by the window. Beside her, unfolded flat at last, the sleeper chair held Naomi curled on her side in the navy coat, one hand tucked under her cheek, the other still resting over the pocket where the note had spent the night. Clean socks, pale blue with rubber grips on the bottom, peeked out from under the hem of the coat. Harrison stood in the doorway and felt the room settle something in him he had not known was still in motion. A real bed would have been better. A child should have had more than this. But this was no longer a hallway chair under fluorescent light. This was rest. Earned, fragile, real. Marisol appeared beside him carrying a clipboard and 2 paper cups of coffee. "She fell asleep in under 3 minutes," she whispered. Harrison accepted 1 cup without taking his eyes off the room. "And Evelyn?" "Respiratory is optimistic this morning," Marisol said. "Still cautious, but optimistic." Harrison nodded once. Then he did the thing that would have seemed absurd to the version of himself who had stepped out of the gala the night before. He asked questions and stayed for the answers. Not what would look generous. Not what could be announced. What medications insurance was delaying. What building code complaint had stalled repairs at the apartment. What temporary housing could be arranged without splitting grandmother and granddaughter apart. What paperwork mattered and what merely made hardship more tiring. By 7:30, Lydia had a furnished short-term apartment secured through the family foundation 3 blocks from the hospital, stocked not with luxury but with ordinary things that meant stability: groceries, warm bedding, a child-sized toothbrush, inhaler storage, slippers, a winter hat, a kettle, a lamp with a soft shade instead of overhead glare. By 8, his legal team had a repair inspector scheduled for the damaged building. His housing director had discreet instructions to handle the Brooks case as one family among many and not a special favor, and his doctor had called to say Ava had slept until morning for the first time in weeks. Harrison stood by the window holding that last piece of news like something breakable. Then his phone lit up with a voice message. Ava. He pressed play at once. Her voice came soft and sleepy, but clearer than it had been the night before. Dad, she said, if Naomi still has the coat, tell her thank you for letting me borrow the brave part. Harrison closed his eyes. When he opened them, Naomi was awake. She had pushed herself up on one elbow, curls rumpled from sleep, the old coat still around her shoulders, watching him with the guarded confusion of a child waking in a room that was safe enough to feel unfamiliar. Did I sleep too long? She asked. Harrison crossed the room slowly, careful not to startle the peace out of it. No, he said. You slept exactly long enough. Evelyn stirred on the bed and opened her eyes, taking in the room, the morning light, Naomi upright on the sleeper chair, Harrison by the window in the same suit from the night before, now creased at the elbows and softened by fatigue. Well, she murmured, a faint smile gathering at the corner of her mouth. Look at that. Morning showed up anyway. Naomi sat up fully then, one hand going at once to the coat pocket, checking for the note. It was still there. Harrison held out his phone. My daughter sent you something, he said. Naomi listened to Ava's message, and when it ended, she looked down at the silver star on her cuff with an expression too quiet to be called pride and too deep to be only surprise. Harrison waited until she looked up again. The apartment will be ready this afternoon, he said. Close enough for hospital visits. No cameras. No speeches. Just a place to be. Naomi blinked. Evelyn studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow, deliberate nod, the kind that granted not gratitude but recognition. Harrison understood the difference. He reached toward the coat then, and Naomi's fingers tightened for half a second before he only straightened the collar gently around her shoulders. It was mine once, he said. But I think it knows where it belongs now. Outside, the rain had stopped. Thin winter sun touched the edge of the window and slid across the room until it found the old navy wool, the folded note hidden safely in its pocket, and the small hand resting over it like a promise that did not need to speak to be true.